Welcome back to Lullaby Atlas. Tonight, we travel through the myths of ancient India. Close your eyes, let the world fall away. Before the world, there is water. Not the cold gray water of storms, nor the bright, restless water of rivers finding their way to the sea, but something older and softer. A pale expanse, still as held breath, lit from no particular place, glowing the way the inside of a white flower glows when a lamp is held behind it. It stretches without shores, without horizon, without the company of any wind. It simply is. It has always been. And on its surface, so gently, so naturally, as though rest itself had taken a form and settled there, something breathes. The great serpent Shesha lies coiled upon those waters, his body curving in wide, unhurried loops that rise and fall like sleeping hills. He is enormous, and he is gentle, and his 1,000 hoods, each one broad as a banyan's canopy, lean inward and upward, overlapping, sheltering, forming a living canopy above the one who rests between his coils. The hoods are dark and luminous, faintly jeweled at their crowns, and they do not move except to breathe. All of them breathing together in a single slow rhythm, the way a forest breathes at the deepest hour of night. And there, cradled within those coils, Lord Vishnu sleeps. It is told in the oldest texts that this sleep is not the sleep of forgetting. It is something far more rare and far more beautiful than that. The old teachers called it Yoga Nidra, the sleep that is also awareness, the rest that is also presence, the stillness in which everything is known and nothing is disturbed. His forearms lie at ease, the sacred conch and the radiant discus held loosely, the mace and the lotus resting as naturally as a child's hand rests after a long day of wonder. At his feet, the goddess Lakshmi sits. She has been there since before the world had a name for time. Her hands move slowly, pressing the soles of those great feet with the patient care of someone who has nowhere else to be and nothing else she would rather do. She does not watch the darkness around her, nor count the ages as they drift past. Devotees sing that this is why fortune arrives quietly, not with fanfare, not announced, but the way warmth returns after a cold night, gradually, gently, already there before it is even noticed. The water makes almost no sound. There is something that might be the softest possible conversation between wave and wave, a sound less heard than felt, low and steady, like the hum inside a large stone temple when the evening prayers have just ended, and the silence that follows still carries the echo of the last syllable. The milk light of the ocean surface moves in long, slow pulses, as though the water itself is breathing in sympathy with the sleeper above it, as though rest has become the whole nature of this place, its one and only weather. From the navel of the sleeping Lord, something stirs. Slowly, the way a new thought rises before it has a shape, before it has even decided what it will become. A stem. Long and pale green, it climbs upward through the milk-dark air, unhurried, inch by inch across ages, carrying at its tip a bud that is already beginning to glow rose and gold at its folded edges. The stem sways with a slight and natural grace, and the bud at its crown turns, almost imperceptibly, in the direction of a light that does not yet exist in any sky. The bud opens. Not quickly. Nothing in this place moves quickly, but with the slow, inevitable patience of something that has been waiting not for the right moment, but for the fullness of all moments to arrive at once. Petal by petal, the flower unfolds, each one a shade of gold that deepens toward the center, the whole blossom lit with its own interior luminescence, floating above the cosmic waters on that single improbable stem, as though beauty had decided that even here, even now, in the dark before time, it needed to announce itself quietly to no audience but the sleeping. And in the heart of the lotus, Brahma opens his eyes. The old texts say he has 4 faces, each looking outward toward a direction that does not yet fully exist, each face calm with the particular calm of someone who has just remembered something very large and very important and is deciding how to begin. He sits with a water pot in one hand and the ancient Vedas held close, and he considers the darkness around him, the vast, the quiet, the unbegun, and something in him, gentle as a first breath, starts to imagine this is how the world begins. It is told that this is the nature of a dream. The dreamer does not labor over it. The mountains do not require effort to rise from the dreaming mind. They simply rise the way they always do, stone by layered stone in perfect silence. The rivers find their way to the sea not because someone planned their winding, but because the dreaming already knew which way the land would lean. Even the smallest creatures, the ones that move through tall grass at dusk, the ones that pause on a warm stone at midday, all of them arrive in the dream already knowing what they are. So everything that follows in this long, slow night, every river and every forest, every mountain and every city built on a riverbank, every prayer ever whispered into the fragrant dark, every lamp ever floated on black water, every story told by a grandmother to grandchildren who are almost but not quite asleep, all of it, the old texts gently suggest, is what the sleeping god is dreaming. Not a small dream, not a hurried one, an enormous dream, unhurried as the ocean beneath it, careful as hands that carry something infinitely precious across great distance. The name of the great serpent is Shesha, and that name carries its meaning inside it like a seed carries a tree. Shesha means what remains. When the great cycles end, when the stars fold back into themselves, when the oceans remember they are not separate from each other, when all of it rests between one age and the next, what remains is this: the serpent, the water, the sleeper, and the place to sleep. The old texts say the bed beneath everything does not end. When the world is put carefully away, as a child's toys are put away at evening, the place to rest is still there, waiting. There is a particular quality to the light here on the cosmic ocean. It has no source and no direction and casts no shadows, because shadow requires something to stand against the light. And here there is only the light itself, distributed evenly through the pale water, through the pale air, through the great coils of the resting serpent and the petals of the floating lotus. It is the color of moonlight seen through a fine white cloth. It is the temperature of breath. And it moves, very slowly, almost not at all, in long rhythmic waves that correspond perfectly to the breathing of the one who sleeps. Lakshmi does not sleep. This is not because she cannot. It is told that she does not wish to. There is something she attends to in this long vigil that goes beyond the pressing of those sacred feet. She watches over the quality of the rest itself, the way a mother watches over sleep, not to disturb it, but to be certain, again and again, that it continues undisturbed. The ages flow past her like slow rivers, and she remains settled and composed, her red gold garments motionless in the absence of any wind, the fragrance of lotus surrounding her like a second silence. In the dream, rivers learn their names. The great one rises in a high glacier, cold and clear, and begins her long journey south through foothills that grow warmer as she descends, through plains that widen around her, through cities that gather at her banks the way people gather around a fire, not because they have to, but because the light and the warmth are there and there is nowhere more natural to be. She carries everything with her. The cold of the high place she came from, the warmth of the plains she crosses, the offerings floated on her surface at dawn, the prayers murmured at her edge at dusk. In the dream, mountains rise. The Himalayas, the old texts name them the abode of snow, climb so high that their upper reaches are not of this world in any ordinary sense. They belong half to earth and half to sky, and the boundary between those two things grows uncertain near the top, where the rock is always white, and the air is always thin and clear, and the stars at night seem close enough to touch. It is in those high places, the tradition holds, that the great sages found their silence, not a silence of emptiness, but of fullness, the way a vessel that is completely full makes no sound when tilted. In the dream, forests fill with green light. The old texts speak of forests where the trees are ancient enough to have names, where the roots go so deep that they reach water that has not seen the sky in 1,000 years, where the canopy is so thick and so full that rain becomes a different thing entirely, not falling but arriving, leaf by leaf, drop by drop, slowly, gently, the way gifts are given by someone who has thought carefully about them. In those forests, it is told, the deer are unafraid, and the rivers run shallow and warm over smooth gray stones, and the evenings smell of wood smoke and wet earth. In the dream, cities come to life on the river banks. Their temples rise in tiers toward the sky, each tier carved with figures that tell the old stories to anyone who looks slowly enough and carefully enough. Figures frozen in gestures of worship, of music, of the particular stillness that comes just before and just after a moment of great understanding. The ghats, the long stone steps that lead down to the water, fill at dawn with the sounds of water poured from brass vessels, of low prayers spoken into the cool air, of bells that ring once and then let their note dissolve entirely into the quiet of the morning. And through all of it, the rivers, the mountains, the forests, the temple bells, the great serpent breathes, and the great dreamer breathes, and the ocean of milk breathes beneath them, and the dream continues, vast and unhurried, making room for everything. Every story told tonight in this long dark is being held inside that rest, the way a seed holds the whole future of a tree inside its small and patient casing, the way a deep well holds the sky in its dark circle of water, completely, quietly, without any effort at all, because holding is simply what it is made for. The serpent's coils shift almost imperceptibly, not with waking, not with unease, but with the natural settling that the body does in deep rest, finding the truest possible ease, the position from which no further adjustment is needed. The hoods above continue their gentle canopy. The lotus continues its quiet luminescence. Lakshmi's hands continue their unhurried work. And the dreamer continues to dream, one long, warm, world-containing dream, while the pale ocean holds everything up, and the silence between one breath and the next is longer and softer than any silence that exists inside the dream. So now, the dream opens wider. The stories that have always been told first perhaps beside a fire, then in a courtyard by lamplight, then in a darkened room while small hands sought a grandmother's hand under a blanket, then across oceans and generations and all the varying distances that separate a teller from a listener. Those stories begin to move again, slowly, the way the river moves even on the stillest day, always already on its way somewhere peaceful. We follow that current now, gently into the first of the dream's long chambers, where the gods themselves are finding their forms. The sleeper breathes, slow. The ocean breathes beneath him, slow. Above the hoods of the great serpent, if there were a sky here, and perhaps there is, or perhaps the concept of sky has not yet arrived, there would be stars, steady and unhurried, as they always are before the world fills in the spaces between them with sound and weather and the small urgent business of being alive. For now there is only this: the pale water, the breathing coils, the glowing flower, the still and watchful goddess, and the face of the sleeping god, composed and complete, keeping everything safe in the quiet of perfect rest. And so the dream deepens. It is told in the oldest texts that time itself moves the way a great river moves, not in a hurry, not in a straight line, but with a vast and patient intention, carrying everything eventually to where it was always going. One day of Brahma, the creator, holds within its unhurried length 4 billion human years, and his night holds just the same. The worlds are breathed outward like a long, slow exhalation, and when the night comes, they are gathered in again. the way a sleeping person gathers a shawl without waking. The four great ages, the yugas, pass the way afternoon light slowly reddens toward evening. In the first age, the Satya Yuga, the old texts say the world stood in full brightness, like high noon in summer, everything clear and unhurried. Then the Treta Yuga, a little dimmer, the way the sun eases behind a thin veil of cloud. Then Dvapara, where the shadows begin to lengthen across the courtyard stones. And the Kali Yuga, this present age, where the light is low and warm and slanted, casting long shadows. Not an ending, simply late afternoon, which has always, without exception, been followed by evening, and evening by night, and night by dawn. Tradition holds the image of a great cow, the cow of Dharma, standing at the beginning of time on four steady legs. As the ages pass, one leg is gently folded beneath her, then another, then a third, until she stands on only one, patient, warm-eyed, unhurried. It is not a tragedy. It is simply the way of things, the way a lamp burns low toward its end without ceasing to give light. And at the close of the last age, there is no punishment, no final darkness. There is only night, rest, and the certainty, as sure as the turning of the stars, that morning will come again. Nothing is ever lost. This is perhaps the quietest and most consoling thing the old texts say. The worlds are folded inward the way a story is folded into sleep. All its characters still present, all its colors still warm, waiting in the dark behind closed eyes. Brahma rests through his long night, and the worlds rest within him, and when his morning comes, the exhalation begins again. The same rivers finding their same beds, the same mountains rising, the same flowers opening their petals in the same sequence they have always opened them, as if no time had passed at all, which, in a certain telling, it has not. We follow the story now down into an earlier age, to a time when the ocean of milk lay flat and white beneath a sky that was not yet fully itself. It is told that the gods and their elder cousins, the Asuras, once stood on the shore of that great ocean and knew that somewhere within its depths lay treasures that had not yet been brought to the surface of the world. They needed a churning rod. They needed a rope. They looked at the mountains and they looked at the serpents. And the mountain that was chosen was Mandara, vast and flowering, and the serpent chosen was Vasuki, whose coils alone could encircle a mountain and hold. But there was a difficulty. Mount Mandara, when they set it in the ocean as a churning rod, had no foundation. It began to sink into the deep water slowly, the way a heavy stone settles into soft river mud. And at this moment, it is told, Lord Vishnu took the form of a great turtle, the Kurma, and dove down through the white water, down through the dark fathoms, all the way to the solid floor of the ocean. And there he settled, vast and patient, his broad back rising just enough to bear the weight of the mountain, the world turning on his stillness. That is the image the old texts offer, all creation resting on a patience that does not waver. And so the churning began. The great serpent Vasuki wound himself around the mountain, and the two sides took their places, some on the tail end, some near the great serpent's head, and they pulled slowly, and the mountain began to turn in the ocean of milk. The turning was not fast. The old texts suggest 1,000 years of this slow rhythm, the mountain rotating first one way, then the other, the white water foaming outward in great lazy circles, the sound of the churning deep and resonant, like a sound felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. The seabirds, if there were seabirds then, would have turned in slow spirals above it, watching. It is told that a great heat rose from the churning, the heat of the mountain pressing against the water, the heat of all that effort sustained across centuries, and before the treasures came, something difficult rose first. A darkness spreading through the water, a bitterness, a poison that the old texts call hala hala, which threatened to spread through everything. And the gods stood still, uncertain. But Shiva came. He came the way a quiet person enters a room where everyone is frightened, without haste, without alarm. He held the bitter thing in his cupped palms and drank it slowly, holding it at his throat so it would go no further. Composure, not crisis, just the still act of a great being taking the hardest thing upon himself so that others would not have to carry it. And the poison left only a mark, a deep and beautiful blue at his throat, the color of a clear sky just after the sun has fully set. That is why devotees call him Nilakantha, the blue-throated one. And when they say the name, it carries within it that whole memory, not of danger, but of steadiness, of a love so calm it would hold the most difficult thing and keep smiling. The mark is worn like an ornament now. Pilgrims at his mountain temples sometimes paint a stripe of blue on the throat of his image, touching it gently with their fingertips, the way one touches a thing one is grateful for. And the churning continued, slow, rhythmic, 1,000 years patient in the white water. And now the treasures began to rise. First came Surabi, the wish-granting cow, stepping up out of the foam with gentle eyes and breath that smelled of warm milk and new grass, shaking the water from her flanks. She stood at the edge of the churned sea and looked around with the unhurried gaze of cattle everywhere, as if she had simply wandered up from a field somewhere and was not in the least surprised to find herself at the beginning of the world. The gods received her with folded hands. Then the moon rose from the water, not the worn and familiar moon we know, but the moon as it was when it was new to the world, silver and dripping, tilted at an angle as though still finding its balance. It is told that Shiva reached into the sky and lifted it with his right hand, the way one lifts something small and luminous from a dark pool, and set it among the coils of his matted hair, where it rested, giving out a cool and steadfast light. That is where it lives still. On clear nights, devotees sing. The crescent can be seen there above the mountain temples, Shiva wearing the moon the way a father might tuck a sleeping child against his shoulder. And then she came. Lakshmi, the goddess, rising from the heart of the churned ocean on an open lotus, the flower holding her the way water holds reflected light, not with effort, simply by its nature. The old texts say she was dressed in red and gold, and that the water fell from her in long, bright threads as she rose, and that the ocean seemed to grow quieter the moment she appeared, the churning settling to a hush. She stood on the lotus and looked out across the white sea with calm, warm eyes, and she held in her hands 2 more lotuses, and from her open palm gold coins fell like slow rain into the water below, and the world felt, for the first time, abundant. She looked at Vishnu. That is the way the old stories tell it, simply that she looked at him. And she took from her own hands a garland of deep forest flowers, white and fragrant, still wet from the churned sea, and she crossed the water and placed it around his shoulders. And that was the choosing. No ceremony, no announcement, just a garland placed with both hands, the way something true is offered. And since that first morning at the edge of the world, tradition holds, Lakshmi and Vishnu have not been separated. She is the warmth in the house where there is enough to eat. She is the gold in the afternoon light. She is what arrives quietly when everything is in its proper order. The last treasure to rise from the churning was the nectar of immortality, carried up in a white pot by the physician of the gods, and its arrival meant the churning was complete, 1,000 years of slow rotation finally still. The mountains settled, the serpent uncoiled. The ocean of milk returned to its ancient quiet, only faintly marked by the slow spread of foam at its edges, like the last circles a stone makes in a still pond long after the stone has come to rest at the bottom. The gods stood at the shore, and it was morning, a morning so large it would take all of memory to contain it. Now we come to the mountains, the Himalayas, whose name carries within it the old word for snow, him, and the word for house or abode, alaya, are not merely a range of peaks in the geography of the waking world. It is told that they are the home of the gods, the place where earth and sky have always touched, where the cold is so complete, and the air so thin, and the light so purely itself, that a person who climbs far enough begins to feel the everyday world softening behind them like a dream. Shiva meditates on Kailash, the old texts say, that flat-topped peak beyond the Himalayas proper, white and still, rising above the lake called Manasarovar, whose water is blue even in winter. Pilgrims have walked to Kailash for longer than history has been keeping count. They come on foot across the high plateau, where the air is bright and cold and smells of stone and ice and the particular emptiness that exists only above the tree line. They carry small brass vessels of water from the rivers below, and they carry prayers worn smooth with repetition, the way river stones are worn smooth, not diminished but refined. Each recitation stripping away everything that was not essential until only the pure form of the prayer remains. The mountain does not acknowledge them, the way any great and quiet thing acknowledges no one, and that indifference is itself a kind of grace, a reminder of how large the world is. And from the mountains, the rivers descend. The Ganges, Ganga, when she is herself the goddess, falls from great heights and spreads across the plains, and her banks have been the address of prayer for uncounted generations. It is told that she first came down from the heavens, and that the force of her falling would have broken the earth had Shiva not received her in his matted hair, where she wandered for a long time through the forest of those coils before she was released gently in 7 streams to find her way to the sea. The river carries everything patiently, the way a story carries everything. The marigold garlands, the brass lamps, the prayers folded into leaf boats and set adrift. Among all the stories the old texts hold like slow water holds the shapes of stones, there is one that devotees tell especially to children at night, the story of a boy named Dhruva. He was a small prince, and one day he was turned away from a place where he had expected to be welcome, and the sting of it stayed with him in the way small hurts stay with children, sharp and inexplicable. His mother told him gently, "If you want the comfort that no one can take away, go and find it at the source." And Dhruva, being a child, took this absolutely literally. He walked into the forest to find God. He stood on one foot, as the old texts describe, the way a young bird stands at the edge of the nest, testing its own steadiness. He fixed his whole young mind on Vishnu, the way a child fixes his eyes on a distant light to keep the dark from frightening him. Monsoon came, and the rain ran down his face, and he stood. Winter came, and the forest went gray and cold, and he stood. The birds grew used to him and perched on his shoulders. The vines began to grow around his ankles. He stood and thought of nothing but that one point of warmth and light, the way a still pool holds the reflection of a single star without letting it waver. And the god came, not with noise, not with the commotion that a great arrival might be expected to bring, but quietly, the way light fills a room when someone opens a curtain. Lord Vishnu came and stood before the child and asked him what he wanted. And Dhruva, who had stood in the rain and the cold for so long that all his small grievances had dissolved, found that he wanted nothing he had started out wanting. He wanted only this, to remain close. And so Vishnu lifted him and set him in the northern sky, and Dhruva became the pole star, the one point in the whole turning heavens that does not move, around which all the other stars travel in slow and faithful circles, night after night through every season. Mothers in India still point him out to children on clear nights, that one star that does not wander, that stays in the north while everything else turns. It is a story about steadiness and about how what is most needed is not always what was first sought in the forest. And the child who could not be still long enough to eat supper stood on one foot for years and became the still point of the sky. The dream within the dream gathers its quiet here. in the space between one star and another, in the long pause between one breath of Brahma and the next. All the worlds are turning. The ocean of milk is still. We follow the silence now, up and up, past tree line and snowfield, past the place where clouds are born, toward the unclimbed dome of Mount Kailash. It is told that Kailash is not merely a mountain, but the still point around which all other things revolve, the way a wheel turns around the quiet pin at its center. At first light, the snow goes rose, then gold, then a pale and absolute white that has no name in ordinary language. The air here is thin and clean and cold, carrying no sound at all, only the long, unhurried breath of altitude. On the heights of Kailash, it is told, Lord Shiva sits as he has always sat, still and still and still. His matted hair is coiled and gathered high, and resting within it, light as a boat on a slow river, is the crescent moon. His eyes are closed. The third eye between his brows is calm. Around his neck a serpent rests in gentle coils, as a garland might rest, unbothered by the cold. The trident is planted in the snow beside him. He is not waiting for anything. He has simply become the mountain. The snow falls around him in the slowest, most unhurried way, as though the flakes themselves are deliberating where to land. They settle on the trident. They settle on the dark stones nearby. Tradition holds that the snow does not dare settle on Shiva himself. It drifts close, considers, and passes on, leaving him untouched in the white silence. A single flake descends for what seems like a very long time, turning once, and comes to rest at last on the back of the great bull who kneels nearby in patient attendance. The bull's name is Nandi, and devotees sing of him with great affection, the one who is always there, the one whose watchfulness never falters. He kneels with his forelegs folded beneath him, his great dark eyes open and steady on the figure of his Lord, as they have been open since before memory began. It is said that anyone who whispers a wish into Nandi's ear will have that wish carried faithfully forward, for Nandi's attention does not wander. The old texts say he is the very form of devotion made solid, patient, warm, entirely without agenda. And so the mountain held this arrangement for ages. The meditating god, the kneeling bull, the snow circling them both like a slow river. Into this stillness, tradition holds, came a young woman who did not ask anything of the great ascetic. She did not bring petitions or complaints. She simply sat down nearby and closed her own eyes and breathed and became as quiet as the rock beneath her. Her name was Parvati, and she was the daughter of the mountain itself, which perhaps explains why she was never afraid of its silence. Night after night she sat on the cold stone. Season after season the mountain watched her. The old texts say she matched his stillness the only way stillness can be matched, by cultivating her own, not by asking him to diminish his. And in the way that silence, when two people share it long enough, becomes something almost like a conversation, the great ascetic became aware of her. He opened his eyes. The mountain, it is said, introduced them then, not with words, but with the particular quality of light that falls on high slopes when the wind drops and everything holds its breath. Of the wedding between the great ascetic and the daughter of the mountain, devotees sing with great tenderness. The gods assembled on the slopes. It is told that flowers fell from above and music came from no visible source, and the rivers ran a little more sweetly for a while. Shiva braided flowers into his matted hair for the occasion. Parvati wore red, and then they returned together to the heights. For what a god of stillness and a daughter of the mountain love most is exactly this: cold air, clean silence, and the companionship that needs no words to feel complete. From the great household on Kailash, it is told, a child would come, and before that child came, there was a doorway, and before the doorway there was Parvati's wish for a guardian she could trust completely. The old texts say she gathered sandalwood paste in her hands, and the scent of it rose in the cold air, warm and resinous and old as forest. and she shaped with those hands a boy, slowly and with great care, the way a sculptor works who is making something that will last. When it was finished, he stood before her, alive and loyal, her own. There was a misunderstanding. That is all the story needs to say about that moment. And what followed was grief, and then, because grief in the presence of love always seeks to mend, it was mended. Lord Shiva, to heal what had broken and to console Parvati, gave the boy the head of the most patient, most wise, most gentle of animals, the elephant, and gave him furthermore the highest honor. Every prayer, in every house, in every temple, forever after, would greet this child first. Before any other name was spoken, his name would be spoken, first among all the gods. And so Ganesha came to stand at every threshold. He is round-bellied and gentle-eyed, and he is fond of sweets. The old texts name the modak, a small dumpling filled with coconut and jaggery, as his particular delight. One tusk is whole and one is broken, and the broken one tells a story of its own, which will come in a moment. His mouse, small and quick and curious, waits at his feet. It is said that the mouse is the mind, darting everywhere, getting into everything. And Ganesha rides it gently, which is the old teaching that wisdom guides the restless mind, not the other way around. Now, the broken tusk. The old texts say that the great sage Vyasa wished to set down the Mahabharata, the longest poem in the world, a poem so vast it contains all of human life somewhere within it, from the smallest moment of kindness to the greatest question a person can ask about how to live. He needed a scribe who could keep pace with his telling. He asked Ganesha, and Ganesha, courteous and attentive as he always is, said yes, on one condition: Vyasa must never pause. The sage agreed and added his own condition: Ganesha must understand each verse before he wrote it. And so they worked, those two, through what must have been a very long night, or perhaps many nights that felt like one. Vyasa spoke in the rolling cadence of one who has been composing for a lifetime, and Ganesha wrote with swift and certain strokes. When Vyasa needed rest, he slipped a verse of great density into the flow, a riddle verse wound, tight as a seed. And while Ganesha sat with it, turning it carefully, examining every face of it, the old sage closed his eyes and slept. It is a particular kindness, this, to give someone a beautiful puzzle that will occupy them long enough for the giver to rest. Partway through, it is told, the writing instrument Ganesha used broke, or wore out, or came to the end of what it could do. And Ganesha, without pausing, without interrupting the flow, reached up and quietly broke the tip from his own tusk and dipped it and continued writing. That is all. No complaint, no ceremony around the moment. He simply found what was needed in himself and used it, and the poem continued without missing a single syllable. This is why every image of Ganesha shows one tusk whole and one tusk broken. Wisdom finishes what it begins, using whatever is at hand. The dream moves now from Kailash toward water, toward a wide white lotus floating on still water, and on that lotus a woman dressed entirely in white, her posture the posture of complete ease, her hands resting on the veena, the way the hands of someone deeply familiar with an instrument always rest, lightly, without gripping, as though the music might begin of its own accord. Her name is Saraswati, and she is the goddess of learning, of music, of speech itself, of every attempt the mind makes to give form to what it has perceived. School children still place their books before her image at the start of a new year. Her swan, it is said, has a gift that no other creature possesses. If a bowl of milk mixed with water is placed before it, the swan can separate the two, drawing out the pure milk and leaving the water behind. Devotees sing of this as the very quality of discernment, the ability to receive the whole undivided world and gently sort what nourishes from what merely surrounds. The held note of the veena drifts across the water, slow and long, the way a thought that has finally found its right words drifts through the mind, without urgency, without force, simply present and then gradually, softly gone. And nearby, or rather everywhere at once, for this is the nature of her presence, moves the goddess Lakshmi. She is the goddess of grace and of fortune, of the warmth that good homes hold, of the feeling that arrives when abundance is shared rather than hoarded. She is gold and red, and she is seated on a great lotus, and the old texts describe elephants standing on either side of her, lifting their trunks and pouring clear water over her in gentle streams, the way blessings pour when they are given freely. She has not arrived yet, she is about to arrive. That is almost always her quality, the arriving. Tradition holds, and this tradition is kept in nearly every household that honors her, that lamps are lit at dusk because Lakshmi enters clean, well-lit homes on quiet feet. Not announced, not summoned loudly, but welcomed by the small, steady act of setting a light at the threshold when the sky goes dark. The ghee lamp or the oil lamp, the small clay diya filled and placed just so, this is the invitation. And the smell of it, the particular warm smell of a ghee lamp burning in the evening air, mixed with the scent of a freshly swept stone floor and the jasmine someone has arranged near the door. This is the smell of welcome. Night after night across all the long ages, in houses made of stone and houses made of earth, and houses by the sea and houses on the plains where the wind carries everything away, these lamps have been lit. The gesture is the same in all of them. The small flame coaxed to steadiness, the brief pause of the hands above the flame, the moment of stillness before returning to the evening's work. It is told that Lakshmi recognizes this pause. She has been arriving at lit doorways for longer than any house has stood, and she knows the difference between a light left burning because no one has thought to extinguish it, and a light placed there with care. And so the great gods rest in their various ways. The ascetic in his mountain stillness, the gentle gatekeeper at every threshold, the goddess of learning in the hush before the first note is played, the goddess of grace in the pause before the lamp is lit. These are not separate stillnesses. The old texts say they are all facets of the one great quiet, the quiet at the center of the universe, which is also the quiet at the center of a sleeping house, which is also, it is gently suggested, the quiet deepening now, in whatever room or wherever this story is being received. High above it all, on the slopes of Kailash, the snow continues to fall in its unhurried way. Nandi's broad back is dusted white now. The crescent moon in the matted hair catches the light of a star and holds it. And the great meditating god, the still point, the ascetic, the one who has been sitting since before the mountains were folded up from the ocean floor, continues his long, unhurried practice of simply being. The snow circles him, the wind passes him. The universe turns on its quiet axis somewhere beneath his closed eyes, and he does not disturb it. Far below and far away, on the great ocean of milk that is older than distance, Lord Vishnu rests on the coils of the serpent Shesha, as he has always rested, and the dream continues, unhurried, in no particular direction, gathering its quiet the way water gathers in a low place, not by effort, simply by being lower than everything around it. The lotus at his navel sways in no wind. The water is perfectly still. All these stories, the mountain, the doorway, the broken tusk, the held note of the veena, are the texture of his dreaming, warm and soft as sandalwood, sweet as the lamp smell of an evening that has nothing left to do but rest. We follow the river now, down from the high places where it begins. Before there was a Ganges on earth, it is told, the river ran only through the heavens, a pale and shining road moving between stars, unhurried, unwitnessed by mortal eyes, known only to those who had already passed beyond the world. And there it might have stayed had a certain king not turned his face toward the sky and begun, with great quietness of heart, to wait. His name was Bhagaratha, and the old texts say he stood in prayer for 1,000 years, standing through the long amber heat of summer, when the ground cracked and the air trembled above the stones, and through the monsoons, when rain came sideways and the plains turned to inland seas, and through the cool, dry winters when stars were very bright and very cold, and the only sound was wind moving through dry grass. He stood, and he waited, and he asked. Tradition holds that the goddess Ganga, moving through the high regions of the sky, heard that long patience and was moved by it. Not by urgency. There was no urgency in Bhagiratha's prayer, only the steady warmth of a lamp kept burning through every kind of weather. And so she consented. She would come down, she would leave the sky and enter the earth. But her descent, it is told, would have shattered everything. The force of a heavenly river falling without pause upon the surface of the world. And so Lord Shiva stood beneath the sky and lifted his face upward, and the river fell into his matted hair. All that force, all that brightness, caught in the long dark locks that had known meditation for countless ages. The old texts say the river wandered there for years, moving through that quiet forest of hair, slowed, gentled, turned and turned again through its own wandering, learning to be patient as the one who held her was patient, learning the long way. Then, when the river had grown quiet within the quietness of his waiting, Shiva let her go. Not all at once, but in 7 careful streams, each one finding its own path, each one the color of early morning, each one carrying something of that long patience in the way it moved. The grass along the banks, devotees say, was already green before the streams arrived, as though the earth had been waiting too and knew. Bhagiratha turned his chariot toward the sea, and the river followed. It is told she walked at his pace, the pace of a chariot on dusty roads, slower than any river might wish to move, keeping to the plains, turning when he turned, resting, in a sense, when the road curved through groves of mango and palmyra, and the shadows were cool and the birds were loud. The king did not look back to see if she followed. He simply moved forward, trusting patience, and the river came. Boatmen on the Ganges still say, generation after generation passing the saying from one wooden boat to the next, that the river moves the way she learned in the wandering years, taking the long way, going around before she goes through, pausing in bends where the current seems to think before continuing. And no one, it is said, is ever told to hurry on the river at dawn. The river herself has never hurried. She arrived when she arrived. She flows when she flows. Where the river turned and settled and grew broad and quiet in its knowing, a city rose on its western bank. Or rather, it is told, the city was always there, held in the mind of Lord Shiva like a word he had not yet spoken aloud. Kashi it is called, the luminous, Varanasi. Perhaps the oldest living city on earth, though age in that place moves strangely, the way all things move strangely at a crossing between worlds. The stone of the Ghats is the color of old honey, warm even in winter. Before the sun arrives, the city is already awake. Small oil lamps move down the long stairways to the water, each one carried in cupped hands, the flame bending sideways in the cool river air and then steadying. The stone steps are damp and dark near the waterline, pale and dry near the top, and bare feet know the difference by feel alone. The smell is of wet stone and sandalwood, and the faint sweetness of marigolds offered the previous evening, their orange petals still bright in the darkness. Devotees enter the water facing east, where the sky is beginning to soften from black to the particular blue that comes just before color returns to the world. They dip below the surface, the river cool and faintly golden even in darkness, and when they rise they cup their hands and pour the water back. River given back to the river. A small gesture of return done the same way for longer than memory holds, the brass pots on the steps catching lamplight, while the act itself is unhurried as breathing. Then the sun appears, not dramatically but quietly, rising directly out of the water of the far bank, which is low and soft and unpopulated, green in the monsoon season and pale gold in winter. It rises the color of a new copper pot, and the river holds its shape exactly. So for a moment there are two suns, one above and one below, both trembling slightly in the morning air. The conch horns begin then, overlapping from temple to temple along the 5 kilometers of Ghats, each one answering the others. The sound of the bells is layered. One bell begun before the last has faded, so the air is always holding more than one note at once, the way the river is always holding more than one current. Temple bells are small and bright. The larger ones send a sound that moves through stone as well as air. Washermen beat wet cloth against the lower steps with a rhythm the river does not interrupt. The pigeons on the upper ledges hear nothing unusual in any of this. It is ordinary, the way sacred things become ordinary through long repetition. All day the river receives what the city brings: flowers, water, prayers offered to the surface as though the surface were an ear. Tradition holds that the Ganges hears everything placed upon her, and that she carries it, not to any particular place, but into the flow itself, where all things eventually arrive at the same wide estuary. By afternoon the Ghats grow quiet. Dogs sleep on the warm upper steps. A few boats drift. The river moves as it has always moved, which is slowly, which is wisely, which is without explaining itself. As the light leaves the sky at the end of the day, going slowly, the way all beloved things go, the priests gather at the principal ghat, and the evening arti begins. It begins with a bell, which is really an invitation. Come back to the river. Come back to the edge where earth meets water. Come back and offer one more moment of attention before the dark takes the day. People descend from the lanes and the temples and the narrow streets and find their places on the steps and in the boats rocking gently at the bank. The priests lift tiered lamps, great branching constructions of burning ghee, 5 flames and 7 flames and sometimes many more, held in both arms and moved in slow circles above the water. The light finds the surface of the river and multiplies. Smoke rises with the smell of clarified butter, thick and warm and faintly sweet. Bells ring, that same layered overlapping, each one inside the other, and the river holds all of it, the smoke and the sound and the light, and gives back only the reflection, steady and wavering at once. Then the small lamps come down. Each one is a shallow clay saucer, barely larger than a hand, with a twist of cotton wick and a small flame and a single marigold petal laid beside it. They are made and brought and held throughout the arti, warming the palms, and at the right moment, when the bells are still ringing but beginning to soften, they are placed on the water. The river takes them. Each flame bends sideways in the small current that runs along the bank, and then rights itself and continues. And then there are hundreds of them, and then thousands. The river carries a river of fire on its back, small, trembling, individual, each one set loose by a pair of hands that had held it carefully, each one now belonging entirely to the current. From the boats, looking back at the city, the Ghats are dark and the water is bright. From the Ghats, looking out, the flames move in a slow procession downstream, around the first bend, and then they are gone from sight, though they have not gone from the river. The bells stop. The stopping is as deliberate as the beginning. One moment there is sound, and then there is the memory of sound, which is also a kind of sound. The priests lower their lamps. The smoke thins and lifts, and the smell of ghee becomes the smell of the river again. Wet stone, green water, the faint chill of the current that has come a long way from the mountains. The crowd does not rush away. They sit for a while on the steps, in the boats, and watch the last lights go around the bend. A thought completing itself, the boatmen say of those lamps. A prayer that has found the only direction prayers can go, which is outward, which is downstream, which is away from the hand that made it and into the keeping of the river. The old texts say that Ganga remembers her years in the wandering, the long, slow moving through hair like a forest, the patience that was asked of her and that she learned, and that this is why she receives everything placed upon her without urgency and without remainder. The city does not go entirely dark. It never does. Somewhere on the Ghats, a lamp is always burning, left by someone who could not bear to let the last light go, or perhaps by the river herself, keeping one flame for the watches of the night. The stone steps hold the warmth of the day for a long time after sunset. The river sounds change in the dark, quieter, more personal, the sound of water against wood, water against stone, water against itself in the long, unhurried grammar of its own moving. And the river moves on, carrying everything it has been given. The water poured back at dawn, the marigolds, the small flames now gone cold but still present in the way that all offered things remain present, moving the way Ganga has always moved, which is the way she was taught to move, which is without haste, which is without forgetting. The dream holds her lightly. Somewhere on the cosmic ocean, beneath a sky that is not quite a sky, the lotus still sways. The water is perfectly still. The long story continues, quiet as a lamp on a river going around the bend. And so the dream deepens and a new city rises in it, pale stone and carved sandalwood in the wide, slow Sarayu River, moving past bathing steps in the early morning. Ayodhya. It is told that this city was built so carefully, so lovingly, that even its shadows fell gently. Lamps burned in every window, not because anyone commanded them to, but because the people of Ayodhya kept their lamps lit the way other cities keep their doors open, out of habit, out of welcome, out of a quiet joy they could not fully name. It is said that on the night the princes were born, every lamp in Ayodhya burned a little steadier than usual, and that lamp keepers went home unneeded, finding the wicks had already been tended by something they could not see. The old texts say the stars leaned down a little closer over the palace roof that night. And those who tell the story add, always with a small smile, wherever the Ramayana is told at night, however far from Ayodhya one may be, lamps burn a little steadier still. Rama grew the way the Sarayu grows in the rains, quietly, without announcement, filling every space it moves into. Mornings, before the city was fully awake, he was already at practice in the long courtyard east of the palace. The creak of the bow, a sound the sparrows learned to sleep through. Tradition holds he drew the bow at dawn with the same attention he gave to everything else, which is to say, all of it, wholly, without remainder. His teacher watched and said very little. The silence was enough. The sage Vishvamitra came to Ayodhya one morning when the air still held the cold of the river, and the king received him as one receives the forest itself, with full attention and no hurry. Vishvamitra asked for the princes to lead them through certain forest paths where they were needed. The king's heart tightened like a knot, but the sage was patient, and in the end, the princes followed him out through the city gate, their sandals soft on the road, the trees leaning over them like elders watching children walk to school. Far to the east, in the kingdom of Mithila, there was a bow. It had rested in a great hall for longer than anyone could clearly remember, on a cart adorned with fresh flowers that were changed every morning by priests who arrived before the sun. It is told that this was the bow of Shiva himself, carried into the world long ago and left there, the way great things are sometimes left in the world, waiting. King after king had come to the hall and placed his hands on it and found that it would not move. It simply remained. Rama walked into the hall at Mithila, the way someone walks into a room where they have always been expected. He stood before the bow for a moment, perfectly still, and the old texts say the lamps in the hall brightened slightly, though there was no draught. Then he lifted it. Devotees sing that the sound of the bow being strung was heard across the city, and that birds rose from every rooftop at once, and that the sound faded slowly the way a temple bell fades. not ending but dissolving into the air, into the stone, into the afternoon. Sita had been brought into the world in the gentlest possible way, not born but found, cradled in a furrow of plowed earth, as though the earth herself had decided to offer something. Her father, the king, had been plowing a ceremonial field when the ground opened softly, and she was there, wrapped in silence and the smell of rain-cooled soil. He lifted her with both hands and carried her home, and it is said the earth sighed behind him, the way a mother sighs when a child has been sent out safely and is in good hands. When Sita placed the garland around Rama's neck, the hall of Mithila grew very quiet. Not the silence of waiting, the silence of something completed. The jasmine flowers against the dark of his tunic, her hands withdrawing, his face unchanged, and yet somehow more itself than before. Tradition holds that the women watching from the upper galleries stopped fanning themselves without noticing. The lamps did not flicker. Outside, the Sarayu was too far away to hear. But in the telling, the river is always present at this moment, a low sound just beneath everything else. The wedding canopy at Mithila was made of banana leaves and marigold, and the lamps beneath it burned through the whole night without needing to be refilled, which the priests noted quietly and did not explain. Flutes played somewhere past the courtyard walls, and drums answered them from a greater distance, and the sound moved through the city the way the smell of sandalwood moves, slowly finding every room. By morning, the marigolds had deepened their color slightly, from orange to something closer to gold, and the banana leaves were still perfectly green. Ayodhya received them home the way water receives rain, without drama, holy, all at once. The streets had been washed and the lamps relit and the garlands changed, and people climbed onto rooftops not to see a spectacle but simply to look the way one looks at something beloved after an absence. The Sarayu moved below the Ghats exactly as it always had. It is told that the city rested easier in the days that followed, the way a household rests when someone important is back under its roof, and everyone can finally stop listening for the door. Then came the day when a promise had to be kept. The old texts do not dwell on how the promise was extracted, or by whom, or the long-ago night when it was given. They say only that Rama heard it and nodded, the way he nodded at everything, as if he had known it was coming and had already made his peace with it somewhere behind his eyes. A promise to him was not a burden. It was a thing that existed and therefore had to be honored. There was no argument in him on the matter. There never had been. A queen whose heart had been turned by old words had asked that the crown go another way, and that Rama be sent into the forest for 14 years. Rama exchanged his silk garments for bark cloth that morning, as calmly as a man changes his clothes for the weather. He touched his father's feet and held them a moment longer than usual, a tenderness that had no need of explanation. Then he stood and smiled at those gathered and walked toward the city gate. The smile, the old texts say, was not performance. It was simply his face doing what it had always done. Sita would not stay. She stood before him in her own bark cloth and said what she said simply, without pleading, as a statement of fact. The forest was wherever he was. Lakshmana, his younger brother, said it differently. He said nothing at all, only picked up his bow and stood at the door, which was answer enough. And so they went out, 3 together, into a morning that smelled of river and wet leaves and the smoke of the city's early cooking fires, which followed them a little way down the road before the wind changed. The city of Ayodhya followed them to the riverbank. People walked behind them through the night, not speaking, only walking, the way one follows a beloved thing as far as one is allowed to go. They slept on the ground at the water's edge, their shawls pulled up, their lamps guttering in the river wind. In the morning, the 3 had already crossed. The far bank held only trees and the sound of birds beginning. The people who had slept on the ground rose slowly and stood looking at the opposite bank for a long time before turning back toward the city. The forest received them the way the forest receives everything, without ceremony, without comment, making space. Within a few days, they had found a path of soft earth through the trees, and within a week they knew the sound the birds made before rain. The sage Bharadvaja told them of a hill called Chitrakuta, where the river curved and the light fell a certain way in the afternoon that made everything look as it were already remembered. They walked toward it, and the old texts say the deer along the path did not run, but stood and watched them pass, which the deer do not always do. At Chitrakuta, the hermitage was built of what the forest offered: branches for the walls, leaves for the roof, the Mandakini River close enough to hear from the sleeping place. Lakshmana built it with care, fitting the pieces the way a craftsman fits stone, and when it was done, the three of them stood before it and found it good. Sita planted things along the south wall. Rama and Lakshmana walked the perimeter at dusk, like farmers checking a field, which is, the texts note, exactly what they were: the exile that was meant as punishment already becoming something else, something quieter and less easily named. Sages came to visit and stayed to talk under the trees. They arrived at all hours, their bark robes the color of the forest floor, their questions careful and unhurried. Rama listened with the same attention he had given his teacher's lessons as a boy, completely, without the part of the mind that is already composing its answer. The discussions went on past the point where the fire needed feeding, and someone would add wood without breaking the conversation. And the fire would come back, and the talk would continue, and the Mandakini would go on moving past the roots of the old fig tree just outside. The years moved the way all deep, quiet time moves, faster in the memory than in the living of it. Each morning the river was there. Each evening the fire was built. The deer near Panchavati, where they moved later to be closer to the hermits of the south, lost their wariness of Sita, the way animals lose it around those who are genuinely unhurried. They would come to the edge of the clearing and then into it, and she fed them from her hand, and they stayed. It is in these years between the famous events that the poem breathes most slowly and most completely. Then the hermitage at Panchavati was empty. The golden deer had led eyes away, the way beautiful things can, and the Godavari moved past the clearing the same as always, but the clearing held no one. In the way the old stories move past their hardest moments, swiftly with a single breath, it is enough to say that Sita was gone, and the world of the poem contracted to the size of a man standing at the edge of the forest, holding his brother's arm, looking at the place where she had been. The grief was total, and out of it came the greatest devotion in all the stories. Hanuman, son of the wind, could leap oceans, but the old texts say his real power was not in his legs but in his heart, which was wholly given over to one name. He was sent across the sea to find Sita, and he crossed in one bound, the way a devoted mind crosses what ordinary minds find impassable. He searched the island of Lanka all through one long night, moving through groves of Ashoka trees with their small red flowers, until he found her at last. Sitting under the trees, guarded but unbowed, her attention turned inward to the same name Hanuman carried in his own breath. He gave her Rama's ring. She held it a moment in both palms, the way one holds something small that is also enormous, and then she gave him her jewel to carry back. The hope that passed between them in that grove, conveyed through two small objects, a ring and a jewel, a night of Ashoka flowers and the sound of the sea beyond the wall, is the summit of the poem. What had to be set right was, in time, set right. And Rama and Sita returned home across the sea and through the mountains and back to the Sarayu, and Ayodhya lit every lamp it had. The dream holds all of it, gently, like water holds a reflection, whole, and trembling only a little at the edges. We follow the river now, down toward the deep forest, where the years of exile began not in grief but in something quieter, a kind of settling, like silt finding the riverbed. At Chitrakuta, where the Mandakini River curved through sal trees and sandalwood groves, Lakshmana built a small hermitage of woven bamboo and river clay, its roof thatched with long grass that dried gold in the autumn sun. The smell of the place, the old texts say, was of rain-wet earth and flowering creeper, and smoke from a small cooking fire drifting sideways through the trees. Sita planted a small garden beside the hut. Nothing elaborate, just the herbs and gourds that grew easily near water, tended with the same quiet attention she had once given to palace courtyards. The deer came first to the garden's edge, suspicious, ears tilting. They came closer day by day, drawn by her stillness, until by the second month they would eat from the border of the plot without running, and by the third they would graze within arm's reach, their dark eyes soft, their breathing unhurried, as though the forest had always meant to be this gentle. Each evening, as the light went amber and the forest birds fell quiet one by one, Rama and Lakshmana walked the boundary of the small clearing, not as warriors on patrol, but the way farmers walk the edges of a field at dusk, checking nothing in particular, simply present to the land. Their footsteps left shallow impressions in the soft earth near the river, and the grass sprang back slowly behind them, and the only sound was the water and the occasional far call of a nightjar settling into its place among the reeds. Sages found them there, wandering scholars of the old forest schools, who had heard that something luminous had settled near the bend of the Mandakini and came to see for themselves. They arrived at dusk, carrying walking staffs worn smooth by years of travel, and they stayed through the night talking under the trees, and sometimes for many days after. The firelight moved on the bark of the sal trees, while the conversation ranged slowly. Questions about Dharma, the nature of the self, the long breath of time, and the hermitage became those years a kind of school without walls. Later they moved south, following the long curve of pilgrimage routes through hills and river crossings, until they came to Panchavati on the banks of the Godavari. 5 holy fig trees beside the river, their aerial roots descending like threads of silver in the morning mist. Here Lakshmana built again, more carefully, with heavier timber and a deeper thatch, and Sita hung a wreath of forest flowers at the door each morning, and the river ran close enough that they fell asleep each night to its low, continuous sound, which the texts describe as something between a lullaby and a prayer. It is told, and devotees have always cherished this detail, that those forest years, which the court of Ayodhya wept over as catastrophe, became in memory the most luminous time. The 3 of them alone in the green world, no ceremony, no court etiquette, nothing between them and the rivers and the stars and the long, unhurried days. The forest gave back what the palace had never quite offered: uninterrupted mornings, evenings without agenda, the particular happiness of living near to what is essential. The poem returns to those years the way a hand returns to a warm stone. Then came a morning that changed the color of the air. A golden deer appeared at the edge of the clearing, impossibly beautiful, its flanks shimmering as though lit from inside, its eyes dark as still water. It moved through the sunlight and the shadow and was gone into the trees, and in its wake came a silence of a particular quality, the silence of an empty hermitage, of a door standing open, of the deer in the garden suddenly lifted and fled, a cry in the voice of someone beloved, an absence where everything warm had been. What the loss awakened, the old texts say, was the greatest act of devotion in all of mythology. Rama searched the forest as a man searches in a dream, calling a name, following a feather, a flower, a thread of scent. And what arose from that search was not rage, but something deeper and older, love crossing every boundary of the possible. It is this love that Hanuman carried across the sea. For now the search had reached the shore, and the shore was the edge of everything known, and beyond it lay the green island of Lanka, invisible in the haze. Hanuman, son of the wind, stood at the cliffs and breathed. He was not the largest of the monkey host, nor the most elaborately armed, but he carried something the others did not, a quality the texts call wholehearted surrender to the task and to the name he held in his chest like a flame held in cupped palms. He took one breath, and the old texts say the cliffs cracked beneath his feet and the sea below shivered, and then he was airborne, a dark shape crossing the ocean like a thought crossing the mind of one who loves, swift, unstoppable, and without hesitation. He searched the island of Lanka all through the night, through its colonnaded palaces fragrant with incense, through its gardens where jasmine climbed stone walls, through the long corridors where moonlight lay in pale rectangles on the floor. And at last, near dawn, he found her. Sita sat beneath Ashoka trees, their branches low and dark, clusters of orange blossom releasing their fragrance into the night air like something kept faithfully despite everything. She was calm, the texts say, and unbowed, her composure itself a kind of answer to the darkness, a steadiness that had not asked permission to remain. Hanuman descended quietly through the branches and held out the ring, a simple band of gold worn smooth, carrying nothing but its giver's name and warmth. Sita received it and held it the way one holds a letter read many times, both the message and the messenger beloved. Then she placed her own jewel, a small piece of her hair ornament, worn since Ayodhya, into his hands in return. And the hope that passed between them across all that dark water was the emotional summit of the entire epic, complete and whole, needing nothing more. A ring, a jewel, two hands, and the sea between. When Hanuman returned across the sea and placed the jewel in Rama's hands, someone asked him later how he could leap so far. What power carried him over an ocean too wide for sight? Hanuman thought for a moment, and then he said, with the simplicity the texts always give his best lines, "I carry Rama's name. The name does the leaping." It is the kind of answer that has been repeated for centuries in temples and kitchens and at the bedsides of children, not because it explains anything, but because it describes something true about the nature of devotion, that love, fully given, is its own propulsion. There is a small story told alongside the great ones, which belongs to this time of the building of the bridge across the sea. The monkey host worked without rest, lifting great boulders and carrying them into the water, and among them moved a small striped palm squirrel. She had no boulder, so she rolled herself in the white beach sand and ran out between the stones and shook herself, and the grains fell into the cracks and gaps. She ran back and rolled and ran again, all that long afternoon, filling what the great stones had left unfilled. The monkeys laughed at the squirrel, which was perhaps understandable. She was very small, and the ocean was very wide, and her sand filling was a gesture where boulders were the grammar. But Rama did not laugh. He watched her for a long moment, the way one watches something that clarifies a thing previously unclear, and then he reached down and picked her up in his hand and drew 3 fingers slowly along her back. The squirrel looked up. And the old tellers say that from that day every palm squirrel in India carries 3 pale stripes, the memory of those 3 fingers, kept in the fur across all the generations since. The teaching in the story is as light as the squirrel herself. The smallest help, fully given, is not small at all. It is not the size of what is carried, but the wholeness of the giving that leaves its mark. That a royal hand should stoop to a squirrel is part of it too. The old texts have a way of folding these moments into the great narratives, like pressed flowers between pages, and they are found only by those who read slowly, which is how the grandmothers always read. Aloud, in the half-dark, with the lamp burning low and the children leaning close. What had to be set right was set right, in the way the old stories always settle their great disturbances. Not quickly, but completely. And then the three, Rama, Sita, Lakshmana, turned toward home. North, across the sea, through the mountains and the long river valleys, and the roads lined with people who had waited 14 years and lined them still. The Sarayu River appeared at last through the trees, running silver in the early morning light, and the city of Ayodhya rose on its bank, and every roof and every window held a face looking outward, watching for the shape of return. Ayodhya had no time to prepare a festival. The court astrologers had been given a night's notice. The markets had barely heard the word. The flower sellers were still sorting blooms in the dark. So every household did the only thing there was to do. They went to the storeroom and brought out the oil and the small clay lamps, and they set them on every wall and every windowsill and every step and every ledge, one after another. Small flames cupped by small palms, and then released to burn steadily in the still autumn night. The streets filled with light from the ground up. Every step a lamp, every wall a lamp, the river itself catching the reflection, until the whole of Ayodhya seemed to float on a second sky, a sky made entirely of small flames. The autumn air carried the smell of warm oil and marigold, and the particular cold, clean scent of a northern night just before the cold truly arrives, that brief window of clarity when everything is sharp and the stars are very near. And through all of it, down the road from the north, came the sound of a city finding the word it had been trying to say for 14 years. Diwali is kept ever since, the festival of the lamps of homecoming. Every autumn, in the 15 days after the monsoon ends and the air turns cool and the paddy is gold in the fields, families bring out their clay lamps and fill them with oil and set them on the threshold to welcome what has been away. The story they are keeping is always this one: the return of something beloved through the dark, guided home by the small, faithful constancy of flame. The lamp does not know the road or the distance, it simply burns. That is its entire instruction, and it follows it with great devotion. And now the dream deepens again, the way all good dreams deepen toward their source. The lights of Ayodhya, so many thousands of small flames, seem from very far above like a reflection of the stars. And perhaps they are. Perhaps every lamp ever lit in love is a star reflected downward, and the two great fields of light, the one above and the one below, hold between them the whole world in its warmth. The serpent Shesha stirs, very slightly, in the cosmic ocean. The great dreamer shifts a little in his rest, and the universe, which is his dreaming, shivers gently at the edges and holds. The ocean of milk breathes slowly. The serpent's hoods curve above the sleeping form like a canopy of clouds before rain. Each hood a world, each world a lamp, each lamp a story coming gently to its quiet end. The tales of the forest and the sea and the squirrel and the ring and the row of faithful flames on the windowsills of Ayodhya settle now into the deep water of the dream, neither lost nor fully remembered, but held. The way the river holds the reflection of the moon, trembling, faithful, whole. The night does not hurry. The sleeping face is at peace. The lotus turns on the dark water, and the dream deepens, as dreams do, folding one story gently into another. And now it is midnight, and it is raining, and somewhere on the bank of the Yamuna River, a prison door has swung silently open. It is told that on the night Krishna came into the world, the rain fell in long silver curtains across the dark plain, and the lamps in the prison guttered low, and every guard slept where he stood, as though sleep itself had decided to be kind. A father lifted a basket and walked toward the river, the baby wrapped in cloth, the rain loud on the stones. The river was in flood, as the Yamuna sometimes is in the monsoon months, wide and restless and dark brown with the silt of many hills. And the old texts say that when Vasudeva stepped into the water, it rose, as if to see what he carried. and it touched the foot of the child. Just the foot, just barely. And then the texts say, with quiet satisfaction, the river parted and made a shallow path, and the water on either side stood like a wall of brown silk. And the father walked across with the rain still falling and the basket still dry. And then, and this is the part that makes children smile and then grow very still, out of the black water rose the great serpent Shesha. The same Shesha, it is told with a soft knowing in the voice, who is Lord Vishnu's bed in the cosmic ocean, the ancient one whose many hoods hold up the sky. That very serpent rose here in a monsoon river and spread his hoods above the basket, broad as a canopy of leaves, and the rain fell on the hoods and ran off them, and the child beneath stayed perfectly, completely dry. The night itself, it seems, had conspired. The guards asleep, the river bowing, the ancient serpent playing nursemaid in the rain, all of it arranged with the quiet precision of something that had always been meant to happen, the way a well-loved story is meant to end. By morning, the baby lay in a house of cowards across the river, in the village called Gokul, in a courtyard that smelled of warm hay and jasmine and the damp earth after rain, and a woman named Yashoda was already learning the weight of him in her arms, already entirely his. We follow the river now downstream a little to where the years have settled into warmth and butter and cattle dust and the sound of a child running barefoot across a courtyard in the early morning. This is Vrindavan, the forest of basil and wild jasmine along the Yamuna, and the divine had decided for a time to be entirely ordinary, to grow up among cowherds, to chase calves through tall grass, to come home with mud on his feet and an expression of great innocence that convinced no one. The texts hold these years with enormous tenderness. They are the years the whole tradition returns to, again and again, the way one returns to a memory of being very young and entirely safe. There was the matter of the butter. Tradition holds that he stole it from his own house first, and then from the houses of the neighbors, climbing up to where the pots hung high on ropes from the ceiling, dipping small dark hands in, and then distributing it to whoever was nearby, to monkeys most conveniently, who were always willing. When Yashoda asked him about it, he said it was the monkeys. The neighbors came to Yashoda with their complaints, and she listened, and she looked at him, standing there with butter still gleaming at the corner of his mouth, and she believed him, or she chose to, which in a mother's love amounts to the same thing. The monkeys were scolded. He was forgiven. Night after night, the butter disappeared. Morning after morning, the monkeys were blamed. And the neighborhood women, the gopis, the cowherds' wives, came in a cheerful procession to Yashoda to tell her what her son had done. And their complaints were so full of warmth that they were really underneath something more like boasting, that the child had come to their house, that he had chosen their butter, that he had sat in their courtyard and laughed. Even in their scolding, the devotion was plain. The texts record the women's complaints in verse so beautiful that devotees have memorized them for 3,000 years and sung them at dawn in temples where butter lamps are still burning. And then there was the morning. It is told in the Bhagavata Purana with extraordinary care when Yashoda finally caught him. She had heard from a playmate that he had been eating mud, and she came to him with the mild severity of a mother who has run out of patience, and she asked him to open his mouth. He opened his mouth, and Yashoda looked in expecting mud, or perhaps expecting butter, and instead she saw, for one vast, completely silent moment, the whole universe revolving inside him, stars and oceans, mountains and rivers, the sun traveling its long road, time itself moving. She saw her own village, the old texts say, turning there inside him, the very courtyard where she stood, the same rope where the butter pots hung, herself looking. She saw herself seeing, and then it was gone, and his mouth was just a child's mouth again, warm and dusty and smiling, and she forgot, as she had to forget, as the dream requires, and went back to scolding him about the mud. But for one breath she had seen everything. And the forgetting itself is part of the tenderness. The texts seem to suggest that this too was a gift, to hold the infinite for a moment, and then to return to the butter pot, and the courtyard, and the child who needed feeding. The years in Vrindavan moved the way slow rivers move in late summer, unhurried, wide, with the sound of cowbells in the evening and the smell of wood smoke from 100 cooking fires. Krishna grew, and the divine continued its patient concealment beneath the ordinary. He herded cattle, he played in the Yamuna, he climbed the Kadamba trees that grew along the bank and sat in them watching the river catch the light. And every evening, as the cattle came home along the dust paths, he played the flute, a simple bamboo flute, nothing remarkable to look at, the kind any cowherd boy might carry. The sound, the texts say, was another matter entirely. Then came the year the rains were angry. The old texts say that a great storm gathered over Vrindavan, not the ordinary monsoon that farmers welcome, but something larger and colder, driving rain in sheets across the plain, flattening the tall grass, sending the cattle into bewildered circles. The families of the village pulled their children inside and watched the sky go the color of iron. And then Krishna, who was a boy still, said something quiet to the people around him, and walked to the foot of Govardhana Hill, and put the little finger of his left hand under it, and lifted. He held it up like an enormous umbrella. A whole hill, with its rocks and its trees and its nesting birds and the rivulets still running down its sides, held up on one small finger in the rain, the size of a village shelter, steady as a roof. And the people of Vrindavan came under it, and the cattle came under it, and every lamp was brought inside, and the fires were kept going, and children slept under a floating hill, as though this were simply what hills did in a storm. The old texts say, with a trace of gentle humor, that by the third day the cowherds had simply grown accustomed to it, the way one grows accustomed to anything miraculous if it is steady and warm and keeps the rain off. For 7 days he held it. The storm tired before he did. Storms always do in the end. On the 7th day the clouds thinned and the rain became a drizzle and then stopped altogether, and the sun came through in long columns over the wet plain, and the grass steamed gently in the new warmth. He set the hill back where it had been. The birds returned to its ledges within the hour as though they had simply been waiting. The cattle went back to grazing. The children ran out to play in the mud, and Vrindavan smelled of rain-washed jasmine and warm earth, and somewhere a butter pot was already going missing from a neighboring house. But it is the evenings that the tradition remembers most. It is the cow dust hour, Godhuli, the texts call it, the hour of cow dust, when the cattle come home along the river paths and the air is thick with golden light and the soft powder of their hooves. The sky goes the color of tamarind honey. The Yamuna catches the last of the sun and holds it in slow gold ripples. Somewhere in the herd, moving easily among the cattle as though he belongs entirely to the ordinary world, the cowherd boy lifts the flute to his lips, and everything stops. The Yamuna slows to listen. It is told this way in the old verses. The river, already slow, somehow grows slower still, as though reluctant to move past the sound. The cows lift their heads from the water and stand with ears tilted, not moving, not grazing, simply listening. The calves forget to push toward their mothers. Peacocks in the dark trees open their fans in the last light, those great wheels of blue and green and gold, and stand perfectly still among the branches, which is not what peacocks do, except apparently then. And in the village, in the doorways of the houses, the doorways hung with strings of marigold and neem leaf, the thresholds still warm from the day's sun, Radha and the village girls stand still. Whatever they were doing pauses, the grinding of grain pauses, the drawing of water pauses, the smoothing of cloth pauses. Their hands simply stop mid-motion, as though the hands too are listening. And there is, the texts say, nothing frightening in this, nothing strange. Only the feeling of hearing something one has always been meant to hear, arriving precisely on time, exactly when the light is right. The Venu Gita, the Song of the Flute, is what the Bhagavat Purana calls the chapter devoted to this hour, and devotees have returned to its verses for more than 1,000 years. The verses describe the sound moving across the water, through the reeds, into the ears of the deer on the far bank, into the branches where the birds have gone quiet. They describe the way the light at that hour is already tipping toward darkness, the way the fireflies are just beginning in the long grass by the river, one by one, like small ideas. And through all of it, the single line of the bamboo flute, unhurried, rising and falling, going somewhere and in no hurry to arrive. And then the autumn full moon came. It is told that on certain nights of the year, when the moon over Vrindavan was at its fullest, round and low and the color of cream hanging just above the kadamba trees, the music would begin again at the river's edge, and the girls would come out to the bank, and the dance would start. The Ras Leela, the round dance, slow and circular in the moonlight, each dancer moving the way a river moves, always forward, always returning, the circle never breaking. The white of their garments caught the moonlight. The river caught the moonlight. The whole world that night was silver and slow. The dance is older than words for it, the texts suggest, older than the verses that describe it, older than the temples where its stone panels have been carved 10,000 times, the circle of figures in the lamplight, hands raised, feet lifted, the eternal autumn night that never quite ends. Devotees sing of the Ras Leela, the way one describes a dream seen once and carried the rest of one's life. Imperfectly, warmly, with the certainty that what was felt was real, even if what was seen has blurred. The flute played, the river listened, the moon did not move, and so we leave it there, in the moonlight, in the silver, in the sound of the flute growing quieter as the night deepens, and the dance continues, and the moon begins, very slowly, its long arc toward morning. The stories of Vrindavan do not end so much as they continue elsewhere, in the carved stone of 1,000 temple walls, in the songs sung at dawn in cities along the Ganges, in the memory of every child who has ever been told about the night crossing and the serpent's hood and the butter disappearing again in the morning. The flute is still somewhere playing. The Yamuna still catches the light at Godhuli in exactly that shade of gold. The dream holds all of it, gently as it holds everything. The midnight rain, the lifted hill, the moonlit dance, the butter, the universe in the open mouth of a child. The stories settle now into the deeper stillness of the dream. The midnight rain already receding, the hill already back in its place among the quiet hills, the flute note already dissolving into the sound of the river, which is the sound of all rivers, which is the sound the cosmic ocean has been making all along beneath everything. Lord Vishnu sleeps on, afloat on the dark water, the serpent Shesha spreading his 1,000 hoods above the dreaming face. And the dream goes on breathing, in and out, story by story, the way the ocean breathes, without effort, without hurry, without end. The moonlight on the water, the lotus on its long stem still turning. And the dream turns, gently, as dreams do, from river and moonlight toward a level field at the edge of dawn. The darkness there is not yet gone. It has merely thinned, become a gray like old silk, like breath made visible in cold air. The old texts say there came a morning, long ago, when the whole world went quiet at once, not silent from emptiness, but silent the way a held breath is silent, full to the brim, waiting, every banner hanging without a tremor in the windless air. On one side, as far as the eye could follow, there were hosts assembled, chariots and horses and men standing so still they might have been groves of trees, or clouds that had settled to earth overnight. On the other side, the same. two great gatherings, like the banks of a river that has not yet decided to flow. Between them, only open ground, only pale grass bending slightly under the weight of dew, and across that open ground, one chariot had driven forward alone, its white horses standing with their heads lowered, patient as stones. In that chariot stood two figures. One held the reins, a young man, dark and calm, wearing a yellow garment the color of marigolds left overnight, a single peacock feather resting in his crown. The other was a great warrior, broad-shouldered, with a bow across his back that had seen 10,000 mornings and never wavered. Devotees know their names at once: Krishna and Arjuna, friend and friend, charioteer and archer, the divine wearing the form of the beloved, so that the beloved could be spoken to directly, without terror, without distance. It is told that Arjuna asked to see, before anything began, what lay before him, and Krishna drove forward into that open space and stopped. Arjuna looked, and what he saw was not enemies but faces he had known since childhood. Teachers whose hands had first placed a bow in his, kinsmen whose voices he remembered from firelit evenings long ago. And something heavy settled in his chest, the way sorrow settles. Not with a crash, but with a slow, certain weight. His great bow slipped from his fingers. He sat down in the chariot. The old texts say he spoke then, and the words he spoke are ones the heart recognizes from its own darkest and quietest hours. "What is right?" he asked, "when every path seems to cost something dear? Why must it be so hard?" He was not afraid of dying. He was something more tender than afraid. He was uncertain, and uncertainty at that depth is its own kind of exhaustion. Tradition holds that he looked up at Krishna and said, in effect, "I cannot," the two smallest words carrying the whole weight of a sleepless night. Krishna did not argue. This is what devotees have always loved about this moment. He did not argue, did not dismiss, did not say the doubt was small. He sat down beside his friend, there in the stopped chariot, in the held breath of that enormous morning, and he began to speak the way one speaks to someone one loves who cannot sleep. Quietly, without hurry, one word following the next, the way water finds its way downhill, not forcing anything, only following what is true. He began, the old texts say, with something almost like tenderness. "What you grieve for," said the voice that had made the sun, "cannot be taken from you. What is real in you, the part that watches, the part that knows, weapons cannot cut it, fire cannot burn it, water cannot wet it, the wind cannot dry it. It was never born, and therefore it cannot die. It has been wearing this life the way one wears a garment, and it will wear another, and another still, without once being diminished. What is real is perfectly safe. It always was." And then he said the line that countless mothers have spoken to sleepless children, that grandmothers have stitched into the air of evening rooms. "You have the right to your work, but never to its fruits. Do the task that is before you. Do it as well as it can be done, with all that you are, with full attention and full care. Then set it down. The setting down is not failure. The setting down is in fact the teaching itself, the place where the tight fist of the anxious mind opens and something cooler and quieter moves in." Devotees sing that the council moved through 18 chapters, each one a room in a great house of understanding. Each room lit differently, some by argument, some by example, some by a single image held up in the morning light. Of all those images, one is the one the tradition has kept closest, turning it in its hands for thousands of years, finding it still warm, a lamp in a windless place, its flame not flickering. "That flame," said Krishna, "is the image of the mind at rest in itself, not extinguished, not suppressed, simply still, burning clear and true without the restlessness that bends it sideways. The mind that is still," he said, "is not empty. It is full, full the way the sky after rain is full, clear and deep, and containing everything without holding anything back. It sees what is, without the shaking that fear adds, without the blur that wanting adds. It can rest in its own nature the way the flame rests in its own light, the way the deep water rests below the surface, even when the surface is moved by wind. This is what is meant, the old texts say, by the word that is very old and very simple, peace, not absence, presence, perfectly calm. There is a verse, spoken there in the chariot, while the white horses waited with their heads down, and the dew dried slowly on the open field, that says, "Whoever remembers me is never carrying anything alone." The old texts hold this promise gently, the way a grandmother holds a small thing of great value, carefully knowing its weight. Whatever the hour, whatever the darkness, whatever the heaviness that has settled in the chest and will not lift, the remembering is enough. In the act of turning toward that presence, the burden is already quietly shared. This is the most ancient form of relief. It is told that somewhere in that long and quiet morning, Arjuna asked to see, to truly see, who it was he was speaking with. Krishna paused, the way a great river pauses before a fall. He said, "I will give you different eyes," for a moment. What Arjuna then saw cannot be spoken in ordinary language, and the text does not pretend otherwise. It says he saw the whole turning universe in that form, suns within suns, all times at once, all rivers running to all seas, all stars in their places, all births and all endings held in one immeasurable presence, steady as the space that holds everything without effort. Arjuna saw, and it is said he was filled with awe so large that awe is hardly the right word. There is no word for standing inside the totality of everything and knowing it is alive and looking back. For a long moment he could only hold still. And then, and this is the moment devotees return to again and again, as if it were a place beside a fire where the warmth is always the same, he asked very quietly for the familiar face back, for his friend, for the peacock feather and the yellow garment and the voice he had known since childhood that had always known his name. And he got it back, the familiar face, the old smile, the friend standing in the morning light as he had always stood, 2 arms, the marigold garment, the quiet eyes that held no judgment for the asking. This is the grace at the center of the story. Not that the universe was revealed, but that after the universe was revealed, the beloved face returned and was enough, was perhaps more than enough, was in that moment the kindest thing. The world is vast and full of meaning. And sometimes the heart only needs the face it knows. The old commentaries, written by devoted hands across centuries, linger at the very end of the Gita on a single image that has traveled through 1,000 years of quiet rooms, the passenger in the chariot and the divine friend holding the reins. The passenger does not need to drive. The mind does not need to grip and pull and calculate every road. There is a hand on the reins older and steadier than the mind's own striving, not taking choice away, but holding the way open, turning the horses gently, keeping the path visible even when the mist is thick. "You can rest," said that voice in the chariot. Not permanently, not forever in the sense of turning away, but in the sense of knowing that beneath every effort, beneath every question, beneath every hour of the night when the mind will not be still, there is something that has never been troubled, something that holds the reins without tiring. The lamp in a windless place, the deep water below the wind, the Himalayan peak above the clouds, patient and still, wearing its snow the way it has always worn its snow, since before the first traveler looked up and called it beautiful. The conversation in the chariot did not end abruptly. It is told that it settled, the way a long evening of good talk settles. Gradually, each word becoming a little quieter than the last, the spaces between thoughts growing softer and wider, the way the spaces between stars are soft and wide when the eyes finally stop searching and simply rest. The white horses stood in the morning light, still patient, still with their heads slightly bowed. The dew had gone from the grass now. The sun had arrived, slow and certain, the way the sun always arrives, without announcement. And Arjuna reached down slowly, without hurry, and picked up his bow. Not with the tightness of before, not with the weight that had made his hands open and let it fall. He picked it up the way one picks up something familiar after setting it down with care, recognizing it, grateful for its weight, which is only the right weight, neither too much nor too little. The question had been answered. Not solved in the way a calculation is solved, but answered in the way sleep answers exhaustion, by giving the mind back to itself, quieted and clear. The old texts do not linger there. They say what needed saying, and then they let the morning be a morning. The chariot stood in the light. The friend stood in the chariot. The horses, when the reins were lifted, were ready. What happened next is another story, a story for daylight, for waking hours, for the part of living that is action and consequence and all the things the sun illuminates. Here in this telling, the camera turns gently, the way a kind narrator turns away from what is not ours to see right now, from what belongs to another hour. We follow the dream back now, as all dreams eventually return to the dreamer. The field grows pale, then paler still, until it is the color of moonlight on water. We follow that moonlight like a thread, back through the stories, back through the forests and the rivers and the mountain snows, back through the sound of Krishna's flute drifting over the Yamuna, back through the deep bells of Varanasi, back through the stars the goddess Ganga carries in her hair. All of it, every thread, leading back to the same great dark water, the same breathing silence, the same dreaming face. Somewhere beneath the waking world, beneath the field and the chariot, and the conversation that answered the oldest question, Lord Vishnu sleeps on the coils of the great serpent, afloat on the ocean of milk, and every story that was told tonight was one breath of that dreaming, one wave, one ripple, one petal turning on the surface of the water. The dream holds all of it tenderly, the flame that did not flicker, the bow set down and lifted, the familiar face that came back smiling. The dream asks nothing of what it holds. It simply dreams, with the patience of something that has all of time. And still the dream deepens. It is told that wherever human hands have shaped stone into a dwelling for the divine, the dreaming God is somehow closer to waking. Or perhaps the builders were simply drawing near to something that was always already there, waiting inside the rock, the way a river waits inside a cloud. Across the wide land, for thousands of years, temples rose like answers to questions no one had spoken aloud. Their towers lifting towards skies pale with morning, their roots sunk into the earth's oldest silence. The old texts say the temple is the cosmic mountain made still, made touchable, made available to bare feet and cupped hands. Its tower, the Shikara in the north, the soaring Gopuram of the south, is Mount Meru given a name and an address. At its outermost boundary, the world is present. Sunlight, crows, the smell of jasmine vendors and cook fires. Step inward, and the courtyards grow quieter, the light softer, the stone closer. The architecture itself is instruction, a wordless teaching that begins the moment a devotee crosses the first threshold. At the very center of the temple, past the pillared halls and the diminishing doorways, there is a room that surprises all who reach it. It is small, almost unexpectedly so, and dark, and the ceiling is low enough to feel like shelter rather than grandeur. This is the Garbhagriha, the womb house. Tradition holds that it was made this way deliberately, so that the seeker would arrive not in triumph but in humility, bending slightly at the entrance, eyes adjusting from courtyard brightness to a single gold flame, finding the beloved face waiting there in the quiet. Of all the temples that the old centuries built, one stands apart in the telling, not because it rose, but because it was found. At Ellora, in the 8th century, builders came to a living mountain of basalt and began not to construct but to uncover, working downward, chisel after chisel, decade after decade, removing a mountain's worth of rock to reveal what the stone had always held inside it. Over 100 years, 200,000 tons of rock were carried away as dust, and from what remained, the Kailasa temple, Shiva's mountain, fully formed. It is a thought that settles slowly, the way stone dust settles after a long day's work. The temple was not built, it was revealed. The mountain already contained it, as the world already contains what is sacred, and the work of the builders was only the patient removal of what obscured it. Devotees who walk its courtyard today, past the great stone elephants along its base and under the carved galleries, still faintly rich with ancient pigment, often say that the air there is different. Not cooler exactly, but stilled, as though the rock remembers 100 years of listening. From the great temples of the south, devotees sing of Shiva as Nataraja, the lord of the dance. It is told that the cosmos itself is his dancing. Every turning of a season, every rise and fall of breath, every small thing beginning and every small thing ending, all of it contained within the sweep of his movement, framed by a ring of fire that is not destruction, but the ceaseless renewal of everything that exists. The bronze Nataraja statues, cast with extraordinary care by Chola craftsmen 1,000 years ago, show one palm open and raised, the gesture that means do not be afraid. The Chola craftsmen who cast those bronzes understood something about weight and weightlessness. A figure in motion, made of metal, that somehow carries no sense of effort, only ease. Only the deep ease of a body that has danced so long it has forgotten the difference between stillness and movement. The Tanjavur temple that houses the great Nataraja rises over the plains of Tamil Nadu like a stone statement about permanence. Its tower visible for many miles, its inner corridors smelling always of sandalwood, and the ghee of 1,000 lamps that have never, in 1,000 years, gone entirely dark. Far to the east, on the shore of the Bay of Bengal, another temple stands, though time has worn it into a kind of magnificent ruin. The Sun Temple at Konark was built in the 13th century in the form of the sun god's own chariot, a great stone vehicle with 12 pairs of carved wheels, each one 3 meters tall, drawn by stone horses that still lean forward into their ancient gallop. The wheels are not only beautiful. The old texts note that a devotee who knows how to read them can tell the hour of the day from the angle of the spokes' shadows, sundials dressed as devotion. There is a particular quality to stone that has been touched by 10 centuries of bare feet. The threshold of an old temple, the sill that pilgrims have stepped across generation after generation since before any living grandmother's grandmother was born, grows rounded and soft-edged, polished not by tools, but by the accumulated tenderness of approach. The rough-cut granite of a temple step becomes something close to skin. Each visit left the stone almost unchanged, and yet after 1,000 years of almost unchanged, the stone has been transformed entirely, shaped by nothing more purposeful than love arriving on foot. The temple's day begins before the sun does. In the deepest hour of pre-dawn, when the sky is still the blue-black of old ink, the priests who tend the deity arrive softly, lighting the first lamps with care, warming water for the morning bathing of the sacred image. And then, in many great temples across the land, the Suprabhatam begins, the good morning hymns sung low and unhurried, meant not to startle, but to ease the god into wakefulness, the way any loved one might be woken, gently, with music, with the smell of jasmine, with a voice that says the morning is waiting and it is safe to open one's eyes. Through the morning and into the full brightness of the day, the temple keeps the rhythm of a household, because that is precisely what it is, tradition holds, the household of a god, maintained by those who love the resident. Water is poured over the sacred bronze or stone in careful ritual, the image bathed and anointed with sandalwood paste, dressed in fresh cloth the color of saffron or deep red, garlanded with marigold and jasmine, whose crushed petals leave a green-gold fragrance on the fingers. Food is offered, rice, coconut, sweet jaggery, and when it returns from the altar to waiting hands, it has become prasada, grace made edible, the god's gift given back. From the 6th century onward, devotion found a new voice, not in Sanskrit alone, but in the mother tongues, the languages of the kitchen and the field and the lullaby. A girl in the Tamil country, whose name was Andal, garlanded the deity each morning with flowers she had worn herself first, her warmth already in the petals. And when the priests discovered what she had done, the deity, it is told, would accept no other garlands. Her winter dawn songs, the Tirupavai, are still sung in December darkness in temples across the south. The birds are calling, she sings, the cold water is waiting, wake gently, Lord. And then there was Mirabai, the Rajput princess of the 16th century, who sang to Krishna as one sings to a beloved who has always known every hidden room of the heart. She sang, devotees tell, not from any need to demonstrate her faith, but from the simple overflow of it, because the song would not stay inside. Her verses moved through the villages of Rajasthan and Gujarat like water finding low ground, entering houses where no scripture had yet arrived. I have found, she sang, yes, I have found the wealth of the name, and people who heard her understood that she meant something as immediate and present as a lamp held close in the dark. Tulsidas, too, in that same century, carried the beloved story of Rama and Sita down from its Sanskrit heights and set it walking in the lanes of ordinary life. His Ramcharitmanas, the Lake of the Acts of Rama, was written, he said, so that the story could enter houses through the kitchen door, on the tongue of a grandmother who had never learned a single verse of formal learning but knew every word by heart. Across the Hindi-speaking heartland, the story of the forest years and the long homecoming entered the language of daily speech, so completely that certain phrases from it are still used today, the way one uses a kind word, naturally, without thinking. The great temple of Rameswaram on its island at the southernmost reach of the land is famous for the length of its corridors. The longest pillared corridors of any temple, the old records say, stretching in cardinal directions from the central sanctuary, so that a devotee walking them in devotional circumambulation covers more than a kilometer of stone. The pillars rise in perfect rows, their carved faces growing softer in the lamp-scattered dimness. And the sound one hears walking there is the sound of one's own footsteps returned slightly slower by the stone, as though the corridor itself is answering each step with a gentle echo of consideration. At Madurai, the great temple of the goddess stands at the city's heart the way the heart stands at the center of the body. The whole city is arranged around it, and the festival calendar of everyone who lives there is the temple's calendar. The gopurams, 4 of them, one at each cardinal point, are covered with hundreds of painted stucco figures, gods and guardians and celestial beings in the full pageant of the old stories. And at dawn they catch the first light before any other structure in the city, turning briefly the deep rose gold of something only half believed possible until one sees it happen for oneself. As the day moves through its hours, the temple marks them, not with clocks, but with offerings, with the particular bell that rings for each of the several daily artists, with the smell of camphor that travels out through the corridors and into the street as a kind of announcement that the hour of the flame has come around again. Dusk brings the evening arti, the lamps gathered together and lifted in a slow circle before the deity's face, the priest's wrist moving in the ancient arc, and outside the temple walls, the sky deepening from orange to the particular blue that is neither day nor night, but the held breath between them. And then, when the last of the evening's devotees have offered their prayers and the courtyard torches have burned down to orange embers, the temple enters its final hour. The priests move now with a different quality of quiet, the efficient, tender quiet of those preparing a sleeping place for someone they love. In great temples, a small cot is brought, silver-framed in some, carved sandalwood in others, with cushions of folded cloth and sometimes a canopy above. The garlands of the day are removed gently, the image tended one last time with cool water, and the faint oil of a butter lamp drawn slowly near and then away. This is the Shayana Arti, the sleep Arti, the last ceremony of every temple day, as old as the temples themselves. The hymns change key, they slow. Where the morning song said wake gently, these say rest now, we are here, the night is safe. The lamps that have burned all day are lowered one by one, each extinction releasing a thread of fragrant smoke that rises and bends and disappears into the dark of the womb house ceiling. The sacred image is laid upon its small bed or settled into its position of rest, and the priests make their final small arrangements. A final petal, a final breath of sandalwood, with the unhurried care of love that does not need to announce itself. For 1,000 years, in every season, in every year for which there is a record, and in all the years before the records began, this has been done. The gods have been sung to sleep. The softest hymns have been brought to the smallest room and left there like a gift. It does not matter that outside the world continues. The carts on the road, the calls of night birds over the river, the stars rearranging themselves in their long, slow courses overhead. Inside the womb house, the night is made tender. The priests step back. The curtain or the carved door is drawn close. The doors close. The sound they make is very small, less a closing than a settling, as though the stone frame breathes in and holds. The outer courtyards are empty now, the last lamp a faint warmth at the entrance. The night has the temple entirely. And somewhere beyond the temple's walls, beyond the city and the plains and the long dark of the Himalayan foothills, the same night deepens over the cosmic ocean, that infinite water, always still, always present, where the dreaming god rests upon his great serpent, and the universe that was made from his dreaming continues quietly to dream itself along. Inside the sanctum, the last rites of the evening are nearly done. The priest moves with the practiced slowness of someone who has performed this act 10,000 times before, lifting the small camphor flame one final circle before the closed eyes of the deity, murmuring the night hymn in a voice so low it is almost indistinguishable from the sound of the building itself settling. The flame is cupped. The doors, carved from old wood and smooth where countless foreheads have touched them, are drawn gently shut. The sound of the doors meeting is the quietest sound imaginable. A breath, a click, a sealing of the night. Outside in the courtyard, the oil lamps set into the stone niches burn lower now, their flames no longer dancing, but standing very still in the windless air. The smell of sandalwood and marigold drifts through the open archway and out across the stone steps, where a single peacock feather, left by some earlier devotee, lies perfectly undisturbed against the cool granite. The priests withdraw one by one through a side passage, their white garments softening into the dark. The courtyard holds only the lamps now, and the faint orange glow they cast upon the carved pillars, each pillar bearing figures that have stood in that telling posture for centuries, witnessing every lamp lighting and every lamp lowering without a flicker of impatience. The temple breathes. The night has the temple entirely, as the night has always had it, as it will have it again tomorrow. We follow the river now down toward the plains. Along the Ghats, the last of the evening's floating lamps drift in the slow current. Small leaf boats, each one cupping a thread of fire, moving outward into the dark water with a patience that seems almost deliberate, almost chosen. The river does not hurry them. The flames lean very slightly as the current turns, and one by one the lamps round the far bend and are gone from sight, their light absorbed into the long dark of the river's going. The river widens as it moves north and then east, carrying the cold of the Himalayan snowmelt in its deep currents even on a summer night. On the banks, the tall grasses are silver in the moonlight. A heron stands motionless at the water's edge, one foot barely touching the surface, as if it too is listening. The sound of the river changes as it deepens, less the talking chatter of the shallows, and more a long, low, continuous murmur, the way someone might murmur a lullaby into a sleeping child's hair. And high above the river, above the plains that recede into dark blue distance in every direction, the Himalayan foothills rise, and then the mountains themselves, those ancient presences, white-shouldered and immense, carrying the moonlight on their snowfields as if they were made for exactly this purpose. The highest peaks float in a clarity of cold air that makes them seem closer than they are, almost reachable, their ridgelines as crisp against the night sky as the edge of a freshly broken shell. Kailash, the tradition holds, is among them, still as it has always been still. And above Kailash, above all the mountains and the moonlight and the long geography of the sleeping land, one star holds its position with a steadiness that all the other stars, in their slow nightly turning, seem to move around. It is told that this star was once a child, that Dhruva, the small prince who would not be turned away, sat in perfect stillness beneath the forest sky until the Lord appeared and placed him there, a point of light that would not wander, that would not be moved, that would be there every night for every watcher who needed something that does not shift. Dhruva is there now. He is always there. The old texts say that certain truths are not told once and forgotten. They are placed somewhere permanent, so that any night, at any hour, a person may look up and find them. The mountains have grown no younger since that small boy sat beneath the stars. The river has not changed its murmuring, and yet Dhruva burns, unhurried, undimmed, a small and faithful light above all the turning darkness, the way a grandmother's lamp burns in the window of the house even after everyone else has gone to sleep. There's an old story, one of the oldest in the telling, about a sage named Markandeya. He was a man of great peace, known for his stillness, his patience, the long, unhurried quality of his attention. He had lived in his forest hermitage for so many years that the trees knew him by the sound of his footsteps, and the deer came close without fear. And then one day, the texts say gently, without explaining how, Markandeya found himself outside, not outside his hermitage, outside everything. There was no earth, there was no sky, there were no directions, not north or south, not above or below. There was only dark water and silence so total that it had weight, like something pressed gently against the ears. Markandeya floated in it, the tradition tells, neither frightened nor drowning, simply there, in the night between worlds, the way a feather rests on still water, held up by nothing he could name. He had never known that such a place existed. He had never known that anything could be so profoundly, so absolutely at rest. And then across that dark and shoreless water, Markandeya saw a light. Not a lamplight, not the light of any sun he knew, but a softer radiance, steady and pale, coming from somewhere ahead across the surface of the deep. He moved toward it, the way one moves through a dream, towards something that is calling without sound. And as he came closer, the old texts say he saw the great serpent first, the coils of Shesha, broad and luminous as moonlit cloud, rising in slow-hooded calm from the water, and upon those coils, the sleeper. It is told that Markandeya stood very still, if one can stand still upon such water, and simply looked. The sleeper was vast beyond any reckoning of size, yet the face was composed and calm, as peaceful as the face of a child who has found the deepest hour of sleep. The goddess Lakshmi sat at his feet, her presence like the warmth at the edge of a lamp's reach, gentle and radiant and perfectly unhurried. The serpent's hoods arched overhead, like a canopy made from the night itself. A single lotus glowed at the navel, casting its pale rose light on the water below. And it was in that moment, the old texts say with great care, that the sage understood. his hermitage. All the mornings he had sat beneath the mango tree and heard the birds begin, the rivers where he had walked at evening, and the particular quality of the light through leaves in late afternoon, and every face he had ever loved, and every quiet conversation, and every season turning, all of it was here, held inside that sleep, dreamed carefully and completely inside the rest of the one who lay before him. Nothing had been lost. Nothing had been dropped or forgotten. The god did not wake. There was no need for waking. With the ease that belongs only to the very deepest rest, the dreamer simply, gently drew the sage back in, the way the sea, without effort, takes back a wave. Markandeya opened his eyes and found himself beneath his own tree in his own forest, the same birdsong beginning, the same grass under his hands, the same light he had always known. But the texts say, and devotees have said ever since, that something in him was different. He was the calmest of all the sages from that morning forward, because he had seen where the world is kept at night. Every story carried tonight, Dhruva's unwavering vigil, and the churning of the vast ocean, and the flute heard across the river at dusk, and Sri Rama's long forest path, and the field where Arjuna sat in stillness and listened. Each of these is being kept safe, right now, in exactly the way the sage Markandeya found them kept. Not stored away in forgetfulness, but held close, the way something precious is held, dreamed attentively, with the full care of the dreamer. The night is not an ending, it is the keeping place. The stories breathe here, unhurried in the dark water and the lamplight. The night is the god's night. It has always been so. The lamps have been lowered, the temple doors drawn closed. The river has carried its last floating flames around the far bend and out of sight. The mountains are white and still. Dhruva burns quietly above them, and the cosmic ocean, that pale, shoreless, unhurried water, holds everything now with the ease of something that has never known urgency, that has never felt the need to arrive anywhere, because it is already, always, everywhere that matters. The last oil lamp rounds the river bend. Its flame does not gutter, it simply passes from sight, carried by the current with a perfect and unhurried ease, and the river continues its long murmuring as if the lamp's passing were nothing more than a breath between words. The water is dark and very smooth. The bank recedes. The night continues. Somewhere in that darkness, the same river that was called down from the heavens, caught in Shiva's matted hair, gifted to the earth. It moves on, faithful as it has always been faithful. The Himalayan peaks hold the moonlight without effort. The snow on their highest shoulders has been there longer than any story told in any of these drifting nights. And above the tallest peak, one star, Dhruva's star, the star placed there by grace for all those who need something that does not wander, burns with its small and steady light, just as it burned when a small boy first opened his eyes in the forest and found himself unexpectedly seen. It burns now. It will burn when the last lamp on the river has long gone dark. The temple doors are closed. Through the narrow gap between them, one small flame is still visible, the lamp left burning through the night, the one that is never fully extinguished, the one the priests light at dawn and that remains, in some form, always present. The carved wood is cool to the touch in the night air. The stone steps are empty. The marigolds placed at the threshold in the evening have folded inward. The whole building breathes in its long, dark prayer, the prayer that needs no words. That is simply the act of remaining. And here, always present, the same pale water that was here at the very beginning of this long night's telling, the ocean of milk, shoreless and still. Shesha's hoods rise like a canopy overhead, their inner surfaces faintly luminous. The goddess Lakshmi rests at his feet, her presence a warmth in the pale air, patient and radiant and entirely unhurried. And at the navel of the sleeper, the lotus glows its soft rose gold, one bloom open, as if it has just this moment opened, as if it opens always at this hour. The sleeping face. It is enough to rest here and simply look at it. The expression is one that has no name in any language. Not exactly smiling, not exactly serene, but something between them, something that is only possible in the deepest sleep, when the dreamer is dreaming something very beautiful and knows, even in sleep, that it is beautiful. All the worlds are there, inside that dreaming. All the stories, all the morning light on rivers and the lamps at evening and the notes of a flute carried across water. They are safe, they are held, they will be here when the dark lifts. Pale water, to the horizon in every direction. One lotus, open, its petals holding a last trembling point of rose gold light. One star directly above, so still it might have been placed there by a careful hand. Water against water, the only sound now, gentle and continuous. The way breath is gentle and continuous when the body has finally fully let go. Nothing moves, nothing is required to move. The night is the god's night, and it has always been enough, and it is enough now, simply to rest inside it. And so the temple doors close quietly on our journey through the myths of ancient India. Thank you for traveling with us tonight. Until our next journey, Lullaby Atlas. Sleep well.